Hi, I'm Amanda McCoy Flanagan. Welcome to Soul Rising. On this podcast, you will hear honest, off-the-cuff, vulnerable conversations about all things love, loss, and connection. Deep and meaningful conversations, sure to pull at your heartstrings and enlighten your soul. Again, welcome. It's time to let your soul rise. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Soul Rising podcast. I am your host, Amanda McCoy Flanagan. We are all in on love, loss, and connection here. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join me. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. Today, we have the wonderful Susie Stonefield. I'm so happy to finally have you here to meet you in person. Susie and I have been following each other on Instagram, and she reached out, and I was like, yes, what you do is perfect for this community. So let me tell you a little bit about Susie, and then we will jump into our conversation. Susie Stonefield, she is a transformational creativity and grief coach. Her passion is making people cry with art supplies. And I told her last week, me too, I love making people cry.
We're special.
You achieved the goal. In one-on-one coaching programs, intimate small group deep dives, and immersive retreats, both in person and online, Susie guides her people to find freedom, relief, and lightness in their lives through the intuitive process of art journaling. So important. Susie has decades of experience teaching, developing curriculum, and creating heart-centered circles. She holds degrees in fine arts and education, certificates in person-centered expressive arts facilitation and grief counseling, is a California native, and calls the unceded territories of the Mechoopda people, the big small town of Chico, California, home. She is a late-in-life queer cis woman, mom to 3 amazing humans, and a guitar-wielding song leader on the side. So, Susie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. You know, we were talking before we got on here, life has just been kind of kicking our butts. So I feel like you guys out there are probably feeling it too. So we're going to talk a lot about what Susie does in the grief world, because what she's going to explain is what's happening right now is we're in a serious time of grief. So yeah, Susie, tell us what you do and why you're passionate about it.
Okay. Well, I am as you said, grief and creativity coach. And I call it transformational because what I have experienced myself and what I've experienced with my clients is that when you can move forward towards your grief with the creative process, you can transform your experience of it. And then you can transform your life.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think that that's important, the reason I'm passionate about it, is that grief, first of all, in our society, we don't get any tools about how to deal with grief. In fact, it's almost just like, don't talk about it, right? You lose someone or you lose a piece of yourself in some way, and you experience grief, and then we don't know what to do with it. First of all, it feels hard and bad and challenging, and we're sad. And so in our society, it's been diagnosed. Often grief is called depression, when actually it's different from depression.
Yeah.
It's a very natural part of a process of living life and losing something. It's also not just related to death. It's not just like you lost a beloved being in your life. You can experience grief when a relationship ends, when you go into menopause and you notice your body is changing, when you lose your job, or the flip side, when you give up something by choice, and then you still miss it. You miss this thing, or you miss how it felt to be comfortable and at home in some place, even though you made a choice to go into this next phase. So, and I could give you 10 more examples at least, right? But grief is a very natural part of living life. And that's not anything that anybody told us growing up. But when we feel it, it feels like something we should avoid. It feels hard. It's scary. It's painful sometimes. So it feels like I don't want to go there. So we need to find ways to deal with it. And sure, there are things like therapy, talking to your friends, just being by yourself and being really sad. But what I've discovered through my process is that creativity is an incredible way to process grief. And one reason for that is that grief often sort of shuts us down, like makes us slow way down. It's really hard to feel almost like the life force when you are in big grief. It's hard to get up out of bed. It's hard to make a decision. It's hard to do the things you usually did that brought you joy because it's hard to feel joy. It's almost an affront to your grief when you feel joy because you're afraid that if you're feeling the joy, that means you're not going to be able to grieve if it's someone you lost, like the person you lost. How can I feel joy too? So it shuts us down, almost paralyzes us energetically. And doing something creative, like dipping your fingers in paint and splashing it all over the page, or scribbling, like taking a crayon and just like scribbling a huge mess on the page. It's actually life affirming to do something like that.
For sure.
So that's just like the first little piece of why I think that creativity is so powerful for beginning the process of facing your grief.
And I know your handle on social media and different places is creativity midwife. And I was thinking about that term. It's like birthing new light and new
Right.
life into the world. So I'm into chakras and stuff. Do you work with the sacral chakra when you're working with women and men?
There's a few of them that I work with. And I'll also say I'm not really a great scholar of it. So it's a place I need to learn more. But definitely the throat chakra of
Yes.
finding your voice, heart chakra of feeling your heart. And what I tell people is get out of your head into your heart and onto the page.
Yeah.
So we're moving in that direction.
Yes. I love that. Yeah. I know the throat chakra can be really blocked when we're in grief. So I love the work that you're doing. I think it's really, really important. And I don't think people, well, let me ask you this question. So how do you get people to move from that space of like shut down, sad, depressed? You hit the nail right on the head when you described what it feels like, right? It's this inability to just move forward. We're like paralyzed. It feels like a paralysis. And so how do you help people to shift out of that into dipping their fingers in the paint and feeling alive again?
Yeah. The first way is I listen to their stories. The way clients enter into my world is they book a discovery call, and it's a very powerful experience of being listened to. I call it witnessing. So I ask people, what brought you here? You know, what called to you about creativity and grief and the work I do? And then they tell me their story, and I'm a really, really good listener. I take copious notes and reflect back to them what I've heard. So the first step is really telling your story and then hearing your story told back to you. It's really validating. I've had clients come to me who told me their story, and I might be the first person they really like spilled all of it to. And they also may have a therapist and a partner or friends who they've talked about it with. But there's something about the way that the space is when we do this discovery conversation where I am just reflecting right back to them all the pieces of their story. And they often share with me that what happens in that is they discover how much the grief is taking up space in their life. So the first part is really witnessing, being witnessed in your grief with someone who is not trying to give you advice about what you should be doing. Like, well, if you have a gratitude journal, then your grief is going to be lighter. I'm not giving anybody advice like that. Not that I have anything against gratitude. Gratitude's great. But then we talk about the work and how this isn't about making art. It's really not about making something that is beautiful. It's not going to a class and painting a landscape painting. It's about using art supplies as your tool to expression, to express whatever it is. For example, like going back to what I described, taking a crayon and scribbling all over the page. Okay. If I give you a crayon and I say, get out of your head and get into your heart about how your grief is feeling today. So you just sit there and you just sort of check in. How is it feeling? Okay. And I give you a crayon and I say, express that on the page. And you start scribbling, and maybe you pick one color like pink or blue, and you're scribbling, and then suddenly you're feeling like the heaviness of it, and you go and you get black and you start scribbling over all the pink and the blue. And I actually have chills just describing this process.
Yeah.
So impactful to feel it show up in this visual way. It's beyond words. It's feeling that's translated into color and motion and marks on the page. And that's all it is. That's all it even has to be. But you feel when you're done, like, wow, I just put it right there on the page. Expressed in a way that words cannot possibly capture exactly how I'm feeling. And now every time I look at this page, I can see how the black is overtaking the pink and the blue. And I'm feeling like it's muffling like the lightness or the sweetness in my life, whatever. I'm putting some words to it, but that's basically what happens in that kind of process. So when people come to me and they tell their story and I describe to them how this works, but you're not making art. You can let your perfectionist go. You're not making something that has to meet some standard of what art is. You're just using art supplies as a process of expression. They get it. And then the first time they do it, they realize how scraping green paint across the page and tearing up a picture and gluing it down and writing one word like captures how they're feeling. And they want more, and they come back for more.
Feels to me like you're providing a very safe space for them to feel seen and heard, right? When you witness and then reflect back their story.
Yeah.
That's very powerful. And it is allowing them, it's like giving them permission to express themselves. I love that you do this because it's like, sometimes we just don't have the words.
Exactly.
We say that about kids, like, oh, well, kids don't know how to process because they don't have the language. Many adults don't have the language either. We don't know really what we're feeling, how to process it. There's a lot of judgment, right? I should feel this. I shouldn't feel this. But when you're giving them this space to just like, here you go, just have at it, just let it out. And if people can do that, I imagine they have to be ready to a certain degree, to be ready to allow themselves to go there. Then it feels to me like it's giving them more direction and understanding. Like, wow, I didn't even know that that's what was inside of me. And now I have something that will give me a bit of direction is the word, or guidance, or now I can understand a little bit better what I'm feeling. And now I can go seek out other alternative areas of what techniques, tips, tools, whatever to heal. Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of giving them that step forward. Like it's clarity. Feels like clarity. And then now I can go and do what I need to do to heal.
Yeah. I call it giving your wordless heart a voice. I always put my hand on the left side of my chest, where my heart space is. I feel very strongly that part of me, the emotional part of me, wants to speak. There's a part of me, my brain, I call it more like the directive part of my consciousness, that wants to boss me around and define everything that I do. But there's a part of me that doesn't get to speak unless I really give it some space and some art supplies, honestly. And that's what I introduce people to, is how to give yourself the space for that that part of your consciousness and your experience to speak. And when you do that, you feel not just lighter, but you feel self-awareness about things that you had no idea. Like you said, you didn't even know that was in there. And then suddenly it's out, it's expressed, and you get to see it and you get to honor your feelings, honor your experience. And so I want to say something about grief in our culture in relation to this. People, because we are not given a lot of support or training or education around how grief is just a part of life, people are very uncomfortable with your grief. And so if you're in grief, often it's just really common for your friends and family to be done with it. Like, I'm done. I can't hear about this anymore. Why haven't you moved on yet? And they might do that at the funeral. Like, they literally might even say, you should go start dating again right now. So they don't even want to like accept that you have a process that you need to go through, and you don't know how long this time frame is, but it's not over yet. Also, if you have just a very deep grief, a lot of people cannot listen to it. They're going to try to, look on the bright side and all of that with you. Come on, come dance with us. You used to love dancing. I know you'll have fun. And not just being able to be with you around your grief. So one thing with me is that, first of all, I am not uncomfortable with grief. And I'm sure you're not uncomfortable with grief either, right? And so it's really a breath of fresh air for anyone in grief to sit with someone who can handle your grief without trying to give you advice or bypass it. So one thing is I sit with people and I can handle their grief. The other is I give them the tools to handle it for themselves, like to be with their own grief. And the other night, one of my clients texted me that she was going through some serious grief about her mom. It had just sort of shown up a little bit out of the blue because that's not really what we're working on in her sessions. And she said, can you give me some tips for what I can do? And I said, first of all, invite it in. Just invite it in. Any kind of resistance that you're feeling about this is just fear that it's going to overwhelm you, overtake you, It's just fear that it's so big. And so that feels really hard and scary. So just the first thing is invite it in. And then honor it, make art about it, paint it self-portrait, paint it the portrait of your grief. Just put it down on paper, write a letter to it, do something with it rather than avoiding it. And so she did. And she actually took the opportunity to write a letter to her mom, and then to paint over that letter on the page, paint an art journal page in the style her mom used to paint. And so she sort of channeled her mom's style and did a painting sort of like that on the page. And it felt like this beautiful honoring of her relationship, of the person her mom was, the artist her mom was, and her grief at losing her mom and missing her. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful to do something like that.
It sounds really powerful. I think that's amazing. So cool that you get to lead people into that heart space like you're talking about. And when you were putting your hand over your chest, I was feeling like just the inner knowing, the inner wisdom, just allowing that to come up because it's in every single one of us. Some of us, it's harder to get to, more difficult to get to because it's buried underneath whatever we're telling ourselves, right? Whatever limiting beliefs we're telling ourselves. Right. About our safety in feeling it really is what it comes down to. And you used the word avoidance a couple of times. And I wanted to maybe dive into that a little bit more about how avoiding our grief is not just hurting us, it's hurting other people that are around us. And it's almost like a duty, especially if you have children. They're watching everything. I don't care how old they are. They're taking it in and they're going to emulate you. You could talk until you're blue in the face, about what to do this, do this. But if you're not doing it, I speak if I'm not doing it, my kids aren't, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
They're going to become like me. So I believe I personally have a duty and an obligation to get to that heart of that grief in whatever way works for me, to then show them and teach them that it's okay. It's okay to feel your feelings. It's okay to express your emotions, because what happens when we suppress them? Addictions, mental illness, suicide, I mean, just codependent relationships, right? There doesn't even have to be like a
Right.
life and death scale, just unhealthy relationships in general, because yeah, grief is is its own animal, right? But grief is just a spectrum on the scale of emotions.
Sure.
So if I can't express that, then I can't express joy. Or if I can't feel my grief, then I can't feel my joy.
Right.
So the art therapy you're doing is not only helping others to feel their own pain, they're also helping them to feel their joy, and then showing other people how to do that. And isn't that what we're put here to do? To help each other through. So, if you're listening and you're like, well, you're speaking to me and I don't know how to get this out. Like, I always like to look at the hard stuff. I'm motivated to do the hard stuff by thinking about service, that I'm not just healing myself, that's going to ripple out. Being able to feel will show other people they could feel, but also being in a good space, being able to shine my light. You
I love,
know,
yeah.
I'm going to want to connect more with you when I'm in a better space. When I'm not, I'm under the covers and I don't want anybody coming near me. Right. So this work is so important. The work that you're doing for so many reasons.
Yeah. And you asked, why am I passionate about it? And I've done many things in my life. All of it led to this. And I had an art studio. I live in Chico now. I used to live in Sonoma County, which is about 3 hours away from here. But I had an art studio about a decade ago, opened it, and I taught people how to art journal there and just kept going more towards programming that was about like the shadow. So started with doing some deep dives. And by deep dive, I mean small group program for like 8 weeks where we go into a topic and I create curriculum and prompts, and then people art journal responding to the prompts, and we share. And we're sharing a journey around a particular topic. I started with a women's circle doing body image narratives, like heal your body narrative. And it was so dark. There's a lot of grief that women hold about their bodies, whether it's violence against your body, whether it's infertility journey, fat shame, getting older, menopause. There's so much, and then gender dysphoria, things like that. So I started there and I kept adding to the programming that I did every year, including topics like transitions. So there's so many transitions in life. All of them have some grief in them in some way because there's an ending and there's a beginning.
Yes.
So even if it's just moving to a new city or a new state and missing your old haunts, something
Yes.
like that. And I did some grief work there. And then the pandemic happened and I had to shut my studio down and ultimately closed it completely. In the height of the pandemic, I started an online program called Creative Life Raft. And it was exactly that. It was like, throw yourself on this life raft and be creative, because how are we going to survive otherwise? And so there was so much grief and so much fear and anxiety people had, especially in the first year of the pandemic. And I had a pretty consistent online community working with me for almost 3 years until I finally shut that program down. But when I started doing deep dives again, and I talked to people about, what do you want? And everyone said grief. It was like the one topic everyone wanted to work on. So my work has been narrowing to this field of grief with creativity. And I have to say that seeing the light bulb pop on for people as they realize that they can live with their grief. Like they can you said move forward earlier. They can move forward when they just accept,
Yeah.
sit with, invite in their grief. They can honor their grief and move on with their life. I just feel so much joy for my clients who get to do that. I feel so much compassion for them when I can see how they are struggling and then how they can move through this really challenging time to a place where they feel lighter.
Mhm.
They feel able to embrace things that they used to enjoy again. They can have hard conversations with people and move on. And they can sort of feel about their grief like it is something that is okay, not something that's just like, oh, so huge and difficult and something they want to avoid.
Get rid of. Exactly. Like eliminating it. Like there's no eliminating
Yes,
grief.
yes,
You're waiting to eliminate your grief and not feel it anymore in order to be happy, joyous, free, and move forward in your life. You're going to be halted. You're going to be stuck forever. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going away. It's about integrating it in a way that works for you and accepting this is just another part of my being.
yes.
And, I feel like there's this like really deranged belief out there that we're supposed to be happy all the time.
Yeah,
We're not. They're
yeah,
only human being at your spectrum of emotion. The grief is not going to paralyze you, right? When you're in this next kind of phase, stage, whatever you want to call it. But yes, integrating it, letting it be a part of you, letting it build character, build grit, build
mhm,
that you are capable of feeling it all.
that's right.
That is so empowering.
It's resilience. It's training you that you have resilience. It teaches your brain that you'll survive. And
Anything.
if you just avoid it, and actually going back to your topic of showing your children that
Mhm.
you can have grief, when we allow ourselves to grieve in front of other people, or we allow our children to grieve, they also get to learn that they will survive the next time this happens, you know?
And
It,
isn't that the goal? Isn't that the goal to teach your children to sprout wings and fly and know that they're going to be okay being independent and being self-sufficient and being on their own? It's not just about getting a job, growing a bank account, finding a place to live. It's finding food. It's not, yeah, those are like basic survival things that we all need to do. But it's about this emotional survival that
yeah,
if we're just pushing away and pushing away. Eventually, that energy is going to ripple out, and you're probably not going to find yourself in a job you're very satisfied in or a home that you're comfortable in. So it's all about doing this work internally. I believe it's where it all starts.
yeah,
And, I'm just so grateful to be meeting people like you and other people in this community that believe this and know this. That's where it all starts. And it doesn't start by being able to always be happy. It really starts with being able to feel pain,
yes,
the struggle.
yeah,
Struggle is where that I believe that growth comes in, that spiritual enlightenment, the evolution, right?
yeah, yeah.
Where we're supposed to be going.
I don't know, you can't really see it, but on my back wall of my studio, I have Rumi's quote.
We see the MI. Yeah.
Yeah. It says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And I really believe that. That's one of the philosophical touchstones for my work is the wound, the pain, the place that you are open is how the light comes in. And the light in the quote, light is capitalized to mean the divine spirit. And and I don't mean this in a religious sense. I mean it in a spiritual sense that we are not vessels without wounds. We are wounded in so many ways because life is that. It's just
Yeah.
going to
It's
be
hard.
that.
Yeah.
And when we can honor the wound, it's the way we feel our own holiness, our own divinity. And that's a special kind of transformation when you can hold that and honor it. And I was going to also say that I try not to talk about healing grief. A lot of people talk about I want to heal my grief.
Mhm.
And it's like I don't know if you heal grief.
Mm. Mhm.
I think you get comfortable with grief. And that's how it can be part of your life. The more you can invite it in and be comfortable sitting with it, the more you can have it and move forward with it. And it starts to take up less and less energetic space and also like conscious space, because the more you give it time, the more it can relax and sort of not have to force itself in front of you all the time. Like, you have to pay attention to me, and it doesn't mean that you won't be struck down by it now and then, hit with some memory and then bursting into tears and sobbing for a while. That happens even if you've done a lot of work with it. It's just that I think in those moments, you'll make it through because of what we said, this resiliency, this knowledge that you can live with it. You can keep going.
Totally. I think we need to come up with a different word instead of healing, because it's not like you're healing a broken bone that's going to mend itself. And I guess any broken bone that mends itself, I don't know if it's ever 100% the way it was before. I don't know. But I'd say the only way that I would use the word healing grief is where it's not that complete being consumed all the time.
Right.
Like, you know that you are in a process of healing. It never fully goes away. So that's a great point. I think there's probably a different word for how we live with grief. I'm actually doing a workshop. I'm calling it Living with Grief. And at first it was called Beyond the Grief. It wasn't about getting past it, leaving your person behind. That wasn't it. But that phrase, I think, gives that connotation. So we changed it to Living with Grief. It's the same concept, but it's more accurately described, where it's about grief and gratitude, pain and purpose, heartbreak and healing, all of this stuff together that, again, it just is going to grow you as a human. And
Yes.
your capacity for feeling, which then helps you to be able to empathize or sympathize or just feel for somebody else, which is, I think, the missing ingredient in what's going on in our culture today. It's like, it's all about me and I'm going to keep myself safe over here and I'm not going to feel for you because maybe it's too hard to really feel your pain, right? So I'm just going to stay over here. I use the phrase emotional selflessness or emotional selfishness. I think that when we can get to this deeper space where we can encompass the whole range by healing or treating a grief or whatever you want to call it, that I think then gives us that ability to enter into these spaces with other people like you're doing, like you've done your work. You're able to now sit with these women and men. I'm not sure who all is there. But that's the greatest gift that we could give each other.
It is. Oh, there's so many things I wanted to talk about from what you just said. One of the things that comes up is that I work with people one-on-one, but also in these deep dives and in retreats. It's so important to be witnessed by other people, to be in a community of people who get it, who really understand. And at the same time, not only being in the circle, but in a circle that's held so that you don't feel that you have to take on someone else's story and then hold it in some way and do something with it. So when I work in small groups with people, I teach them about witnessing, because witnessing is about being fully present when someone shares who they are, listening, seeing, holding, making space in that way, feeling empathy. But it is not about having to do something with that person that helps them feel better. Witnessing it makes someone feel better just by the act of being witnessed. And then you don't have to take their story and then somehow find some place to put that in you. I think that when people are in grief, they're already so overwhelmed with their own story. They don't know, well, how could I be in a group of people who are feeling grief because I already feel so terrible. I don't want to hear someone else's terrible story. And I don't know what to do with that because I feel so much empathy. So I actually teach everyone how can you be in a circle with others and not be a sponge who like absorbs all of this? So I actually teach not only social boundaries with witnessing, but I teach somatic experiencing exercises so that after each person shares, we do a somatic practice to release. So we are not carrying it around, because by the end of an evening of sharing, it's a lot to hold. So I teach people, how do you like recenter your nervous system? How do you release it? Just gently letting things go and then sit back down, able to then hear another story. It's really powerful.
So important to stay in the work, to be able to do this stuff and to get that support that you need. It sounds like a skill to be honed. It kind of feels like something that you might have to practice a little bit in order to not take that on as your own. And I do think that's a great point. I think that a lot of people are afraid to go there because, the protect your energy phrase, which is like
Right.
huge. And we do need you. But to what degree? Are we holding ourselves back from others because we're so worried and scared that we're going to take on these other people's energy and other people's stories? No, you don't. You don't have to. And most people that are grieving, they don't want you to tell them how to feel, right?
No, not at
They're not looking for a solution from you and trusting that they have that inner wisdom, that inner knowing. They have their own answers.
I really believe that. Yeah.
It's already in them. And a good practitioner, facilitator, coach, counselor, whatever, trying to help others is not coming at somebody that I have your answer. It's you have your answer.
Exactly.
I'm just helping you to bring it to the surface.
100%. My training is as a person-centered expressive arts facilitator, and that is 100% what that means. I believe that you are the best guide for your journey. I can hold the flashlight in the shadowy places. I'll walk next to you, but you're the one on the path. And I completely believe that you have the power to do that. So yeah, I really agree with you about that.
Yeah, you're taking people's power away. If we're coming in and trying to save them,
Right.
the only person that can save somebody is themselves.
Right. And if you're with people who are trying to tell you how to grieve, it does make you pull back. It doesn't make you want to be vulnerable, to explore the tender parts of your heart and your story. It makes you put up the guardrails and really pull back. And I think that what's really also very significant about the grief experience is it can be very isolating when you feel like you can't tell people about it because they're going to judge you because you're still grieving so much, or they're going to tell you how to grieve or tell you to move on with your life. You just end up feeling more and more and more lonely and alone. And then it's really hard to know how to process and honor and deal with it. And so that's another thing that gets to happen if you come into one of my circles or you work with me as a coaching client, that you're not alone anymore. You don't feel that isolation that is so typical in a grief experience.
Yeah, I think people giving the advice or, even the suggestions or whatever, I think they are good intentioned. But I think what it sounds like to the receiver is I'm doing it wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Again, I don't think that's the intention of the giver, but I think the one who's receiving it just automatically, like grief puts us in such a vulnerable place. I feel like our emotional security feels a little bit threatened and we don't feel as self-confident or our self-worth is damaged or suffering at the time. So people, that are out there that want to help other grievers, try to remember that they're already in a state of feeling like kind of bad about themselves. Maybe I shouldn't be grieving for this long or this hard. Why can't I just move on with my life? They're already in that space. So coming at them with some sort of advice or suggestion, however well-meaning, they're not going to take it the way that you're intending.
Right. Unless they've asked for it. But I would imagine, I think that most advice that comes to someone in grief is not asked for. So
It's not. Most people just want somebody to be with them.
yes.
I've been thinking about that holding space phrase and like holding space for somebody. This kind of goes back to this skill that you were talking about that needs to be honed about not taking it on. Like I've been thinking about holding space for somebody, but holding space like with somebody. Like how can we be, and what's your take on this? How can we be like with them, but also not like fully entrenched? How does that work?
Boundaries.
Now,
My favorite topic, but next to me. Yeah, it's about awareness. When I am talking to my clients about this, I say it's sort of like bumper bowling. You know the edge is there. So let's put the bumper there and be really clear. We talk about the kind of comments to make and what your responsibility is to someone else in the circle. Your response, and also reflecting on how does it feel to you as the recipient of all these things. So when they can reflect on how they feel, in those shoes of someone getting the advice or someone else, this is really common. You're telling someone, they ask you about your grief, you're telling them your story, and then suddenly it's like all about them. And they're telling you their whole story. Well, not to say that there's anything wrong with getting to know people, but there's certain situations where when you've really made yourself vulnerable, it needs to stay. Like that's the container. It's the Amanda show at this moment, right? Amanda's telling the story of Amanda's grief. It's not time for Susie to come in and go, oh, well, that really reminds me of the time I felt blah, blah, blah. And suddenly all of our attention and energy shifts onto me.
Mm.
So when I am working with my clients, I'm really teaching them how do we use those bumpers, those, bounce up against them a little bit, but how do we hold the space? How do we keep checking in with ourselves about what our job is here? And our job is just to be there with someone else. It's not to take the light onto ourselves. It's just to have the light on that person for a little while. Let that person sit there quietly and gently hold them and honor them. I don't know if that makes sense, but
oh, totally. It's a whole other layer
yeah.
you're doing.
Yes.
Right, because people probably don't realize when they're coming to your sessions or your retreats that they're learning that skill as well. How
Right.
to be a good listener, how to
Right.
give more than take, whatever it is. But
Exactly.
that's awesome. Good.
And it's hard. It's hard. Actually really uncomfortable for people at first. We just had in one of my groups, we had a conversation about this recently because everyone wants everyone to feel good. And so we sometimes will reflect on someone else's work with a different attitude. Like someone will share something that's, this is me, I'm feeling really negative, tearing my walls down, blah, blah, blah. And someone else will reflect on, well, I really see something very positive in this.
Mm.
I see the possibilities, I see creativity, whatever. This just happened recently in this group. And so I talked to them about honoring, like allowing someone to just have their feelings. Like it's okay. It's okay that she feels like she has to tear herself down a little bit right now. We can just let her say how she feels without having to like flip it, have a different perspective. It's actually more important that we just allow people to have feelings.
Yes.
And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's an opportunity for you to check in with yourself about why does this make me feel so uncomfortable? That she feels the way she feels.
Uh-huh.
And so there is a lot of that, a lot of time to self-reflect.
Yeah.
Why do you feel the need to give someone advice? When the most powerful thing someone can say to you is when you've just shared something about how you're doing, when they say, that sounds really hard. Like, wow, I feel so seen. It is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much better for the person who just shared the hard thing to feel that you get that it's hard rather than to suddenly have to hold your story or your advice or So I teach all of that and try hard to help the people who are really uncomfortable with those boundaries learn that that's actually how we feel safe in a group situation. This is because we know what the boundaries are.
And also allowing for silence, right?
Yeah.
Silence is like really uncomfortable. I did an internship years ago, and that's where I learned that it was in a therapeutic setting. And I felt the need to keep saying something like, and I'm in recovery. I'm in 12-step recovery. And in our meetings, nobody shares. And I don't need to jump in. And I had played a little game with myself. Who's the most uncomfortable in silence right now, right? And who's going to be the one to jump in? Because the next one that shares, they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But so many skills you're teaching. So it's not just about grief. It seems that way.
And it's not just about creativity either.
No.
Yeah.
That's so much, so much. Well, Susie, this has been an awesome conversation. I think you're amazing and doing fantastic work. Thank you so much for being here. So I usually ask my guests for one bit of wisdom or tidbit or something that you want to leave our listeners with.
Yeah, it's another one of my guiding principles for my work. You sort of touched on it when we were talking about healing grief, whether you heal grief or not. It's the Japanese practice of kintsugi.
It's in my book. I write about it. Yeah.
Well, do you see the gold paint on my wall? I painted the wall to look like kintsugi in my studio.
I gave my husband a dish and a little green dish with some gold in it because it's the story of our relationship. It's a conversation, but tell us what it is.
The idea with kintsugi is that a piece of broken pottery is mended with gold rather than trying to hide, like with invisible glue, trying to hide all the cracks and put it back together again. It's mended with gold lacquer, which then highlights all the cracks, highlights the broken places, and makes the vessel unique and far more beautiful for its broken places. And so I just take that and transfer that to the story of our hearts and our personal journey. And the fact is that no one is a perfectly formed vessel. We all have scars, and those are our stories. And the more we can bring honor and beauty and acceptance and validation to those places, the more beautiful our lives can be. And that's why I do the work I do.
That was said so eloquently and beautifully. And thank you so much for that. You can find out more about Susie on her website, unfoldart.com. She has ongoing online and in-person programs, including small group grief programs like we talked about, multi-day retreats, and one-to-one coaching. So I'm actually going to put a link down below. Susie has generously offered us a workbook just for podcast listeners. It's a grief and creativity invitations workbook. Can you just tell us super quick what that's about?
Basically, it's sort of what I talked about with ways to start this process of using creativity to touch into your grief and sort of see how it feels. A little bit of a supply list and then 3 little prompts to give you some ideas for getting the process started.
I love it. I'm going to download that. I'm going to check that out. I love it.
Fine.
So where can people find you? I will put all these links below, but why don't you tell them where you want them to find you?
So on my website, the best link to click is the discovery call, and you get to tell me your story and we get to figure out if there's anything that I'm offering that is helpful to you. I have lots of free content on my website too, videos and prompts and things like that, and a blog. You can find me on Instagram, creativity_midwife. And on Blue Sky, also Creativity Midwife. Those are the main places. Also on my website, you can grab my favorite art supplies list. So if you want to get your little art space set up, you can find out what my favorite things are for art journaling.
That's awesome. And you have a whole bunch of upcoming programs that I'm going to list in the description with links. So guys, go check this out. Go find Susie. She is a heart healer. Definitely. I could feel that just by nature. So thank you so much for being here, Susie. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Amanda. This was great.
Okay. Take care. If this episode resonates with you and you want to dive deeper, check out my blog, Get Real, All In on Love, Loss, and Connection at AmandaMcCoyFlanagan.com. That's McCoy with a K. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Amanda McCoy Flanagan. See you next time. Until then, let that soul rise.